Dive into the remarkable life of Anna von der Mark, better known as Anne of Cleves, a Renaissance duchess who carved out her own destiny in the glittering yet perilous world of King Henry VIII's court. Uncover the hidden layers of German nobility, vibrant hunts in misty forests, and strategic royal alliances, all culminating in a story that defied expectations and led to an extraordinary independence unmatched among Tudor queens. Anna von der Mark was born around the close of June 1515, perhaps 1 or 2 months shy of the more traditionally cited September date. She enters a world of political deals, grand alliances, and cunning negotiations, but also of joyous carnival days, magnificent hunts through misty forests, and the quietly humming tapestries of domestic life. Little could anyone guess that someday this softly crying infant would stand side by side with the formidable and famously demanding King Henry VIII of England, only to become one of the most intriguing figures in the Tudor tapestry, a woman whose life defied expectation and ended more peacefully and prosperously than most women of that era could ever hope to achieve. Her parents each wielded authority in their own right. Johann III, Duke of Cleves, and Maria, Duchess of Jülichburg. As a Renaissance-era power couple, they governed their respective lands in tandem, though at the beginning they had a marriage that some whispered was more about territory and treaties than about romance and companionship. Their marriage, however arranged or practical, brought forth a brood of lively children: Sibylla, Wilhelm, Amalia, and of course Anna. Renaissance Germany wasn't just about princely banquets and gilded halls. It could be surprisingly open to women ruling or regenting in their own names. Maria herself was a formidable ruler, at times overshadowing Johann in her domain. She had that cool composure that comes from genuinely holding the levers of governance, the ability to levy taxes, to settle disputes, to decide on property laws. This model of female leadership would leave a lasting impact on her daughters, giving them skills that would surprise and sometimes baffle other European courts not accustomed to seeing women so heavily involved in what was considered men's work. Young Anna, when she was old enough to totter around on her own, spent most of her childhood in a place called Berg Castle in Solingen. Between stone walls draped with colorful hangings and windows that peered out over green landscapes, Anna's days were filled with the kind of disciplined yet family-oriented routine that shaped a Renaissance noblewoman. From dawn to midday, she might be seen poring over some basic reading and writing exercises, only in German, of course. Latin or French were considered more advanced, more academic, and apparently not crucial for her as far as her father was concerned. After lunchtime, the women of the household delved into large-scale domestic projects: spinning, embroidery, sewing, and general household management. At first glance, this might seem like an ordinary medieval or Renaissance upbringing, but there was a twist. Because German noblewomen were genuinely expected to hold fort when necessary, Anna and her sisters received training in property law, tax customs, and estate management. It was a skill set that shocked and puzzled English observers years later, who found it rather masculine that a woman should know so much about collecting rents, overseeing farmland, or arbitrating disputes among tenants. Yet if Anna's education seemed unorthodox to outsiders, it was perfectly normal. In her homeland, she learned which soils would yield the best harvest, how a small difference in weather might bring a bountiful crop one year and a pitiful yield the next. She learned about the responsibility of employing local farmers, of reading the mood of a region, whether its populace was content with tax rates or simmering with discontent. And with her sister, she learned to skillfully use a needle and thread, producing embroidery so fine that samples survived for more than a century after her death. Her mother's approach was that a ruler, be it male or female, had to know every inch of the territory under their command. And so it wasn't unusual for Anna to follow Maria on estate inspections or to watch her mother deal with local magistrates, hammering out the intricacies of disputes over farmland boundaries or local resource rights. Watching her mother, Anna absorbed a certain pragmatic grace, a sense of how a woman could, if necessary, stand tall amid a sea of male advisors and hold her own. In this swirl of early modern politics, religion too was in flux. Anna's family was a microcosm of the shifting sands of faith across Europe. Her mother was staunchly Catholic, but her father harbored Lutheran sympathies, tolerant of the Reformation movement that was shaking up the continent. Sibylla, her older sister, would become a fiery supporter of Lutheran ideas after marrying a fervently Protestant husband. Wilhelm, the only brother, stayed nominally Catholic, but was open to friendly relations with Protestants. Then there was Amalia, another sister who threw herself into Protestant reforms with an almost fearless intensity. Meanwhile, Anna ended up somewhere between all these poles of faith, exposed to them all, but never fully pinned down to a single ideology with unwavering fervor. Perhaps that's why, years later, her public conversions, or reconversions, didn't shock those who knew her well. Anna had a gift for pragmatism. If survival and prosperity, or at least peace, required outward compliance with a religious position, she would give it without fuss. After all, she'd grown up watching her own family navigate these twists and turns. Conformity and tolerance were woven into the tapestry of her very upbringing. Life at the court of Cleves-Jülichburg was governed by an intricate structure that balanced formality with family warmth, a balance that shaped Anna's childhood and ultimately the woman she would become. In the cool hours of the morning, thick stone walls still retaining the night's chill, daily business began in earnest. Dukes and their advisors conferred in dedicated chambers, reviewing tax records, property disputes, and strategies to strengthen alliances with neighboring lands. Meanwhile, the duchesses, princesses, and noblewomen, Anna included, were far from idle. Though often overlooked by outsiders, they too engaged in critical matters behind the scenes. In hushed tones, they learned how to keep an entire region afloat, how to manage household finances, measure out food supplies, and monitor the morale of the people who depended on them. If a crisis struck, unseasonal floods, a shortage of grain, tensions between local merchants and the ruling family, it might well be the women who stepped in to arbitrate practical solutions, wielding authority in ways that visitors from England or Spain might find surprisingly direct. Afternoons brought a shift in atmosphere, and the official gravity of the morning gave way to a more social, convivial mood. The family gathered in high-ceilinged halls adorned with carved wood, colorful tapestries, and flickering candlelight, where they would dine, converse, and sometimes be entertained by the talents of traveling musicians or actors who arrived seeking the patronage of the Duke and Duchess. The women, changed out of their morning attire, might wear more elaborate dresses, bright with embroidery, reflecting the vibrant court culture of Renaissance Germany. Chatting among courtiers, they exchanged snippets of local news or discussed festival plans, perhaps the upcoming carnival, or a visiting dignitary from another principality. The laughter of Anna and her sisters would mingle with the measured voices of older nobles, weaving a kind of tapestry of sound as the day progressed. Outdoor pursuits, however, were a particular highlight in Cleves-Jülichburg, and few activities were more celebrated than the hunt. Anna, tall and lithe, her blonde hair flashing under the sunlight, mounted her horse with an ease that spoke of both training and genuine passion. Whether it was the thrill of galloping through dappled forest paths, or the excitement of spotting deer among the trees, she rode with confidence and grace. You can almost imagine her leaning forward in the saddle, a determined smile on her face, her laughter bouncing off the trunks of ancient oaks as her sisters fanned out to either side, their own horses kicking up leaves and dust. On particularly festive occasions, hunts were followed by lavish meals under open-air tents or in nearby lodges, where noblemen and noblewomen alike recounted the day's adventures, teased one another good-naturedly about missed shots, and praised the skill of the hounds in tracking game. It was in these hours, away from the formalities of the council chamber, that Anna's innate warmth and ability to connect shone through. She was comfortable here, and everyone around her felt it. Yet for all this lively camaraderie, Anna's early life was also marked by the realities of strategic betrothals. At around 11, an age most modern societies deem startlingly young, Anna was promised in marriage to the son of the Duke of Lorraine. For the ruling elite of Europe, marriage was less about romance and more about forging alliances that bound families and territories together. No one found it odd that she might be engaged before she was old enough to fully understand the obligations she was to shoulder. The arrangement lingered for years, stretching from childhood into her late teens. Meanwhile, Anna continued her studies in estate management and improved her skill at reading and writing in German, frequently practicing penmanship by drafting letters or copying household accounts under her mother's watchful eye. Over time, her engagement to Lorraine's heir quietly dissolved, canceled without any of the dramatic fallout one might imagine. Anna, now 18, showed no outward sign of heartbreak or anger. It seemed she was far more attached to her home and family than to any promise made on paper. That sense of rootedness became even more evident when tragedy struck in 1538 with the death of Anna's father, Johann III. He had been a guiding influence on her education, a man with a scholarly inclination, a friend to Erasmus, and a reform-minded approach that had left an imprint on his children. His passing catapulted Wilhelm, Anna's only brother, into the position of duke, forcing him to navigate a sudden tangle of dynastic responsibilities and alliances. Now, as head of the family, Wilhelm was the one who would make crucial decisions about his sister's futures, including Anna's. If she had hoped to remain close to her mother and siblings, refining her quiet domestic tasks and continuing to manage household affairs, destiny had other plans. In neighboring England, King Henry VIII had lost his third wife, Jane Seymour, in 1537. After a brief period of mourning, he was once again seeking a marriage that could shore up England's strategic needs on the European stage. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister and a staunch advocate for reform, looked toward the German states, a bloc of territories that, if allied with England, might counter the formidable power of Emperor Charles V. Upon assessing the landscape, he saw the Duke of Cleves as a key potential ally. Young Wilhelm, however, was understandably cautious about sending any of his sisters off to a king widely rumored to be both volatile and demanding. Reports of Anne Boleyn's downfall and execution had traveled across Europe, and Catherine of Aragon's tragic fate was also well known. It was not a decision to be taken lightly. Still, diplomatic channels opened, and thus began a series of careful negotiations, each side angling for the best possible terms. English ambassadors arrived, eager to see Anna up close to report back on her appearance and character. The stakes were high because Henry placed great value on personal chemistry. He wanted a wife who pleased his eye, and the memory of how Jane Seymour had comforted him after Anne Boleyn's tumultuous downfall still colored his expectations. Wilhelm, determined to control what information they could glean, insisted Anna remain veiled and clad in voluminous German gowns that offered little hint of her figure. For a king like Henry, who considered himself a connoisseur of courtly beauty, it was a frustrating arrangement. If there was to be a portrait, then let it be done, but strictly supervised. And so Hans Holbein the Younger, an artist renowned for capturing the essence of his sitters with uncanny skill, was commissioned. He returned to England with an image of a serene, poised young woman, her gaze steady and her complexion fair. The months that followed saw further letters and envoys shuttling across the Channel. To tip the balance, Henry made a dramatic concession. He waived many of the traditional dowry demands, offering instead a large sum to Wilhelm. It was an astonishing gesture, signaling just how eager the King of England was to secure the alliance. Wilhelm ultimately relented, assured by the English ambassador's praises of Anna's gracious demeanor. Thus, in late 1539, Anna embarked on a journey to Calais, her first major step away from the only home she had ever known. The voyage proved arduous, hindered by inclement weather and the size of the retinue accompanying her, which included not just ladies-in-waiting and household officers, but also servants, guards, and even personal musicians to maintain a suitably regal appearance. With each passing day the sea stretched out, gray and restless, reflecting the uncertainty Anna must have felt as she stepped into a future both thrilling and unnerving. The crossing to England was the final hurdle, and once ashore, she was greeted with fanfare designed to impress upon her how much the English populace anticipated her arrival. Nobles lined up to welcome her, and ordinary citizens flocked from rural villages for a glimpse of the foreign princess. Word spread about her tall figure, her fair hair, and the mild courtesy with which she received compliments. In letters sent to Henry, ambassadors described how Anna carried herself with both shyness and open-hearted warmth. She waved from her litter to gathered crowds, her blue eyes lighting with genuine pleasure at their enthusiastic cheers. In grand receptions, she answered questions about her homeland in soft-spoken German, occasionally assisted by interpreters, but her smile spoke volumes even when the words faltered. For a brief and hopeful period, it seemed that everything was proceeding wonderfully. Anna looked every bit as lovely as Holbein's brush had promised, and her gracious demeanor eased the anxieties of those who feared a dull or overly timid queen. The road stretched ahead toward a marriage that would tie Cleves-Ulichburg and England together in a tapestry of alliances. That Henry would soon form a far different opinion upon meeting Anna in person was a reality yet to unfold, leaving this moment, her arrival on English soil, as a bright, hopeful interlude in a journey that would soon take a startling turn. Then came one of the most famously awkward moments in royal courtship history. Henry, impatient, decided he couldn't wait until the official date of their meeting, January 6th, to see her in person. On New Year's Day, with a flair for the dramatic that he had often indulged, he went to Rochester, where Anna was staying, disguised. It was a game of courtly love, the very sort of masquerade that Henry believed would charm and delight her. He burst into her rooms dressed in plain clothing, with only a small retinue, and presented himself as a messenger bearing a gift. Had Anna been a seasoned member of his court, she might have recognized him or played along. But Anna had no idea who this strange man was. She treated him with polite confusion and possibly a hint of panic. When Henry tried to kiss her hand, she was startled. The chemistry he'd hoped to spark with his surprise gesture fizzled painfully. Henry felt humiliated, and he slunk away to strip off the disguise and reapproach her as himself. The second attempt wasn't any better. She responded with a grave, courtly bow, and he gave her a brief, awkward kiss. Behind closed doors, Henry seethed with disappointment and anger, complaining to Thomas Cromwell, "I like her not." The morning of January 6, 1540, dawned gray and cold, a biting wind sweeping through the grand courtyard of Greenwich Palace as courtiers bustled about, preparing for a royal wedding that felt as tense as it was opulent. Despite Henry's private misgivings, no expense was spared. Tapestries with gold thread shimmered from walls, and immense candelabras were carefully polished so their flames would dazzle the guests. Servers carried trays laden with hot spiced wine and sweetmeats, attempting to ward off the chill that crept in from the Thames. Outside, curious commoners gathered, stamping their feet on the frozen ground to keep warm, hoping for a glimpse of the king's new bride. Inside a chamber lined with damask, Anna stood motionless in her bridal finery, eyes momentarily resting on her reflection in a tall mirror framed by carved wood. The dress, a fusion of English and German styles, felt heavier than she'd expected. Around her, ladies fussed over her veil and arranged the folds of the rich fabric, each tug and whisper reminding her that she was no longer Anna of Cleves, a young duchess in her family's castle, but Anna, soon to be Queen of England. She smiled politely when servants curtsied, but beneath that careful composure her thoughts churned with uncertainty. The king, she sensed, was not the affectionate groom of her hopes. He had made no secret in private conversations, at least not secret enough to keep from spreading that she was not what he desired. Yet everything Anna knew about her upbringing as a German princess told her to stand firm, to honor the alliance her brother had arranged, and to carry herself with dignity no matter the circumstances. The ceremony itself was splendid. Henry, clad in sumptuous velvet, embroidered with golden lions, moved through the hall with a measured step, his features set in the practiced smile of a monarch before a grand audience. Trumpeters lined the route from Anna's chamber to the chapel, blasting triumphant chords as she walked toward him. Courtiers parted in hushed fascination. Some were curious about this new queen from across the sea, while others suppressed knowing smirks, having heard rumors of the king's dissatisfaction. Anna's heart hammered in her chest as she reached Henry, noting the faint shadow of displeasure lurking behind his eyes. Still, the officiating bishop proceeded, reading out the solemn vows in Latin. Anna's responses, spoken softly with her German accent, bound her to Henry in the eyes of both God and the kingdom. In the ensuing days, Anna assumed her new roles in a whirlwind of festivity and protocol. She appeared at banquets seated beside Henry, dazzling in jewels that glittered against her pale skin. Musicians played lively tunes, as dishes laden with roasted meats and exotic spices passed along the tables. Through it all, Anna maintained a polite, composed facade. She smiled when Henry introduced her to high-ranking nobles. She tried in her own halting English to express gratitude for gifts presented by courtiers. Sometimes she caught herself glancing across the crowd for a familiar face, someone who could speak her language freely, someone to reassure her that she was safe, that her new life could be happy. In those moments, she reminded herself that she had endured many transitions before, that her role now was to be a queen worthy of respect. Yet behind the layers of finery and protocol, a different reality loomed. Henry's coldness seeped into their private interactions. He would dutifully escort Anna to her chamber at night, but his conversation was curt, his demeanor distant. Each morning, courtiers discreetly took note of whether the king seemed pleased. He did not. Gossip spread like wildfire, fueled by Henry's complaints. He began confiding in a small circle of advisers that Anna's body, by his judgment, was unappealing, and that she did not stir his desire. He pointed to what he called his own nightly emissions as evidence of his continued virility and placed the blame for their unconsummated union entirely on Anna. At court gatherings, there was a subtler form of disapproval. Some courtiers looked upon Anna with pity, recognizing that she had drawn the ire of a notoriously unpredictable monarch. Meanwhile, Anna herself existed in an echo chamber of foreign words and cautious smiles. Servants switched to English around her, and she understood only fragments, catching her name now and again. Her ladies-in-waiting tried to comfort her, but their knowledge of German was limited. She sensed, however, that things were not as they should be. The king seemed to enjoy public displays of camaraderie with her, enough to satisfy the obligations of court appearances, but in the privacy of their bedchamber he hardly attempted more than a fleeting good-night kiss. A now famous conversation offers a glimpse into Anna's confusion. Her ladies suggested she might still be a virgin, and she responded with genuine, or possibly feigned, naivety, insisting that if the king kissed her at night, surely she was no longer a maid. One of the ladies gently clarified that a mere kiss would not be enough to produce an heir, leaving Anna flustered. Whether she truly did not understand the details of intimacy or was shielding her pride, the exchange highlighted her isolation and the cultural gap between her upbringing in Cleves and the sophisticated, gossip-laden English court. This awkward marital stalemate could hardly endure for long. By late spring, Henry's eye had already settled on Catherine Howard, a young, flirtatious courtier whose lively charm contrasted starkly with Anna's more reserved demeanor. The king, longing for fresh infatuation, seized on every possible argument to dissolve his union with Anna. He ordered his lawyers and bishops to examine her previous betrothal in Germany, seeking any pretext to declare his current marriage invalid. After all, this was the same king who had twisted doctrines and legal precedents to end previous marriages. Anna could see the writing on the wall. On June 24th, Henry dispatched Anna from court under the pretense of caring for her health. She did not fully grasp what was unfolding until, only a few weeks later, officials arrived with papers declaring her marriage void. They pointed to the earlier betrothal, claimed the union had never been consummated, and announced it could thus be easily dissolved. At first, Anna reacted with distress and dismay. She called for her ambassador, presumably to mount a defense or at least understand the legal intricacies. For a moment, she may have considered opposing Henry, but the echo of stories about Anne Boleyn's and Catherine of Aragon's fates, combined with Henry's well-known ruthlessness, hung ominously. Anna grasped how dangerous it might be to fight a man who had in the past turned on queens for far less. Thus she relinquished any protest and chose a path of acquiescence. The shock of it left her shaken. She had set foot in England just months earlier, expecting a future as its queen. Now she was being set aside. Nonetheless, her clear sense of self-preservation took precedence. She signed the necessary statements acknowledging the marriage's invalidity, tears likely still stinging her eyes. Her composure in those painful moments would end up shaping her destiny. By bending to Henry's will, she avoided a far grimmer fate. She may have lost the crown, but in doing so, she was about to gain a security and freedom that few noble women of her era could ever hope to achieve. The king might have found her unattractive, but because she did not resist him, he had no cause to treat her harshly, thus giving Anna an unexpected path toward a calmer, more independent life in England. Henry was taken by surprise at just how readily she accepted. Perhaps he'd expected a bitter legal fight. Instead, he found that she was willing to do what was necessary to secure a comfortable, protected life, and so he responded with uncharacteristic generosity. He offered her houses, lands, a handsome annual income. He publicly declared her still a virgin, free to marry again if she so chose, and titled her his beloved sister, second only in rank to the queen and his daughters. She was given Richmond Palace, Bletchingley, and famously Hever Castle, formerly the home of Anne Boleyn's family. To some observers, the arrangement seemed shockingly cordial. Anna's decision to remain in England rather than return to Cleves might have also been rooted in a fear that her brother Wilhelm would be enraged by her disgrace, and that returning home might jeopardize her security. Whatever her exact reasoning, the result was that Anna effectively became one of the most privileged, independent women in England. And what a life she led for the next 14 years. History tends to overshadow the story of Anne of Cleves with the more dramatic narratives of Henry's other wives. Catherine of Aragon's tragic dethronement, Anne Boleyn's fiery downfall, Jane Seymour's poignant death in childbirth, Catherine Howard's ill-fated youthful fleeing, and Catherine Parr's precarious final match. Yet from a certain vantage point, Anna emerged better off than all of them. She neither lost her head like two of them, nor was she forced to see her children taken or her own religion publicly scorned. Instead, she settled comfortably into the English countryside, managing her estates, making friends with local gentry, showering kindness on servants and staff, and reappearing at court on occasions when the king, or later his children, invited her. She grew close to the Lady Mary, later Queen Mary I, who appreciated Anna's steadfast kindness, and she was on good terms with Elizabeth, the future Elizabeth of Hers, who harbored her own brand of intelligence and caution. Occasionally, Anna had cause to see Henry and his new wives, or to dine with members of the royal family. She made a famously cryptic remark when Catherine Parr married Henry, saying, "Madame Parr is taking a great burden unto herself." Some speculated it was jealousy or a subtle jab at Henry's track record, but it may well have been a simple expression of empathy or even mild alarm, because by then Anna understood all too well the cost and danger of being tied to such a powerful, erratic man. When Henry died in 1547, Anna wrote to his children and pledged them her loyalty. She lived quietly through the short reign of Edward VI, appearing at court from time to time, always greeted with respect. Under Mary's reign, she was even granted a place of honor, walking behind Elizabeth at Mary's coronation. But the happy dynamic did not last forever. In 1554, a group of rebels led by Thomas Wyatt rose against Mary, partly to protest her Spanish marriage to Philip II. Suspicion fell on many prominent Protestants, and Anna's name surfaced as a possible supporter of the rebellion, true or not. In the climate of fear that permeated Mary's court after the rebellion, Anna found herself excluded from court invitations. She wasn't arrested or stripped of her properties, but there was a definite chill in the air. She retired more firmly to her estates, focusing on her household, her fields, her staff, perhaps reflecting on how fragile royal favor can be, even for someone who had been for a time the king's very wife. She never regained her former closeness with Mary, but she maintained warm relations with Elizabeth. Still, the wear of life and time took its toll. By 1557, Anna's health was in noticeable decline. Some guessed it was a form of cancer, but the records aren't entirely clear. On July 16, 1557, she passed away quietly in her early 40s. Her death was widely mourned by those who remembered her as the kind, uncomplaining woman who had navigated enormous upheavals with dignity and tact. Mary I, despite the recent distance between them, arranged for her to be buried in Westminster Abbey, in a place of honor near the high altar. Even in death, Anna was granted a respect that underscored her unique position among Henry's wives, a position that combined royal rank, beloved sisterhood, and an independence that was extraordinary for that time. Looking back on Anna's story, it's tempting to label her solely as the lucky one among Henry VIII's wives. It's true, she avoided the tragic fates of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. She wasn't subjected to the devastating drawn-out humiliations endured by Catherine of Aragon, nor did she go through the perils of childbirth like Jane Seymour, or the complicated cat-and-mouse religious politics Catherine Parr faced. Instead, Anna walked away from her royal marriage with her head held high, pockets full, and a freshly minted set of grand titles and properties, free to define her own future in a foreign land that eventually embraced her. This outcome might obscure the reality that, for many months, she was vulnerable and anxious, stuck in the middle of lethal court intrigues that could have ended in disgrace or execution. She could never have predicted just how favorably Henry would treat her once the annulment was final. It was a high-stakes gamble in which her humility, patience, and sense of self-preservation paid off.